Hello and welcome back to another session on the live stream of the Guest Education Global Leadership Summit. Thank you all for joining us. A few bits of information before we get underway in case you've just joined us. There's a chat panel located on the right-hand side of the GRIP platform. Please feel free to ask us any questions and we'll do our best to pass these along to our speaker. You can also view and download some handouts provided by our keynote speaker on the main screen of the session under the Handouts tab. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michelle Borba, educational psychologist and best-selling author of Thrivers. Dr. Borba, it's a pleasure to see you again, albeit virtually this time, and congratulations on the launch of your new book. We hope that the audience enjoys this session, and I'll now hand over to you.
Oh, thank you. It's absolutely an honor to be back. I wish I were there in person to you all, but what a year we've had. I think the most important thing as educators is this is one of those incredible moments to reset and rethink what do our kids really need in today's really fast-paced pandemic new world. We know it's an accelerated world. We know it's a digitally driven world, but maybe what we also need to do is take a moment and rethink how we want our kids to turn out. What are they going to need? This generation, it's going to be called the pandemic generation, as they finally walk across that stage, get diploma wherever they are in the world. I think what we need to put back into the plate is something called resilience. I know we know that because we've been looking and being concerned about many of our kids of which ones are going to be able to bounce back and face adversity. And I want to remember something that I want to share with you that happened way back when in my old ed psych days. It was one book by one woman who changed my life, changed the whole trajectory on my education. I started out as a special education teacher, but Emmy Warner was the researcher. Now, she had the same question that every educator has. Is there hope for some of the kids that have really endured adversity, the real trauma? Some of kids have shared grief, but a lot of our kids have really, with poverty, homelessness, to domestic abuse, to violence in their homes, which kids are going to be able to overcome? So in 1950, she began a study that was revolutionary. She identified a whole cohort of children who faced those kind of adversity, and she decided to study them with a big, huge team of pediatricians, social workers, and she discovered something that she wasn't prepared for. A very large portion of them overcame. They bounced back despite the adversity. They were vulnerable, she said, but not invincible. Why? And then she began to study them even more in depth. By the way, she wasn't the only researcher. There was Norm Garmesky, who did it with homelessness kids, schizophrenic parents. There was Michael Rudder in England. There was thousands of other studies that were going on, and all of them came up with the same thing. Children do overcome. They do bounce back, but they have to have two things going for them. Number one is protective buffers, protective factors, the skill sets, like sometimes we can call them social emotional skills, the skill sets like coping or problem solving or critical thinking. We weave so many of those already into our existing programs, but many kids say we're not getting them nearly enough. You're not making them into habits. And so when the adversity comes, many of our kids do tank. The second thing is, she said, always and always, by the way, every other researcher said the same thing. These kids have what is called also protective people in their lives, champions, caring people who refuse to give up on the child. You put protective factors and a protective person in a child's life together. Those are the kids who endure. Those are the kids who will make it. And that's what I want to keep in mind, is that we do make powerful, powerful differences on our children's lives. So let's just take a moment and look at what do our kids need according to these studies on resilience. And maybe that's the moment to rethink. And then maybe we take a couple of moments and think about how to weave these into our already existing programs. Please know, I'm not suggesting we buy one new program. I'm suggesting instead we take scientific evidence and say, let's weave it in. When I looked at 21st century skills, the last time I was in Dubai, I was looking at the Global Economic Summit and what their findings were. In the meantime, I was also looking at mental health that is plummeting. We're looking at a rise across the world of stress amongst our children, depression and anxiety, but also peak performance. What helps them in a classroom? It took a while, but I finally came up with 7 what I call character strengths. They're universal. I can use these in Abu Dhabi, but I can also use them in Florida. I can use them in the UK. I've also used them in Rwanda. They're the same that matter anywhere. They are universal. The second thing is they're teachable. Each one of these is made up of a skill set. You're going to get a handout later on where you can see what the skills are that teach each one of these. The third is they optimize not only performance, but also in our classrooms, the ability to bounce back, to be able to cope, to be able to focus. You put them all together. I think that's the best hope we have for our kids. Let's just take a moment. Let's weave through some of these. Let's figure out how to take them in. And I think the first thing we need to keep in mind is that when we're looking at a pandemic generation across the world, I mean, I just got a call from Hong Kong to work in Hong Kong. 93% of all of the educators say that mental health is plummeting. We need to do something about it. The new studies in the UK said the same thing. Anxiety and stress is going in, particularly the younger kids. They're far more worrisome. We're looking at studies that just came out of China. We're looking at the CDC in the United States. All of them are saying the same thing. That is, our kids have faced a very, very troubling year, and we need to look at how to help them cope. And so we begin with the first most important thing, and that is empathy and confidence. Of we need to step into the plate, and maybe it's not teaching the children empathy and confidence, but we tuning in and going, what do our kids need? Now, there's some interesting things along the way, and I want to share one little thing, because when we look at what Emmy Warner says, we overlook easy things. I point this out because I laminated it. It's my first grade teacher. Her name is Mrs. Fredrickson. To this day, when I walk into any classroom anywhere in the world, I try to conjure this woman up and say, be Mrs. Fredrickson, because she did what Emmy Warner would say is the epitome of how you get through to a child. She never stopped caring. She greeted every single one of us every single day for the entire school year at the door. She greeted us with what she called her an H or an H. Do you want to choose a hug or a handshake? In today's kind of social distance world, maybe it's a elbow, but it's nothing more than, hi, how are you? How are you doing? The fascinating thing is she was always there to praise us too, but it was praise from the inside out. It wasn't praise of, oh, you look so cute with these new shoes or your new hair. It was, thank you for being kind, Michelle, or thank you for hanging in there yesterday, Robert, because she wanted to instill in us character. Emmy Warner, when she researched all of those children that did endure, and she asked the simple thing is, why? Why did you keep on going? Every one of the kids said it was because of the teacher. She refused to give up on me. The fascinating thing, I know you're looking for where I am. I'm the one with the bangs cut straight across. But she also did discipline. Discipline that was so simple and so moral, the integrity piece that of the 7 traits. Self-confidence, empathy to be able to feel with another, self-control to be able to put the brake on impulses, integrity to be able to think straight and self-regulate so you also know what you stand for with a strong moral code, curiosity, the curiosity so you're open, you can think outside the box, perseverance, you don't stop, you keep on going and don't need a trophy in order to do it, and finally you have optimism and hope. Her moral code was anything did something wrong, was that helpful or hurtful? So what are you going to do to make it helpful? Mrs. Fredrickson instilled that resilient mindset of being a caring champion. And I know it because years after I graduated from first grade and I went on to high school, we had a reunion years later of 9 of the kids from that first grade class showed up. What's the single most important thing you remember about first grade? H and H. Was that helpful or hurtful? Every day, remember we walked in and she'd say, how you doing? What's your simple rituals? And Mammy Warner and all of the research on resilience would say, don't just look at the classroom teacher. Janitors, custodians, cafeteria workers, secretaries, principals, bus drivers, anyone can reach the life of a child and touch them. What we've got to do is get on board together because our kids are hurting. And what we do know is when we reach them, we can finally teach them. But we also know those are the things we need to instill in our kids. How about the kids that are really hurting? Calgary. A Calgary principal did the simplest answer again, a photograph. I worked with him a number of years, but every time I'd go back to the school and very adverse kids having some really tough struggles, I'd go, how is it going? He said, you won't believe it. The simplest thing we did is changing the life and the course of the teachers. I said, what are you doing? Every month, I bring in one photograph of one child who I know is hurting, just one photograph. And I always say, here's the kid I'm worried about. I can't tell you the things that are happening in this kid's life right now, but it's really troubling. But if you see him or her, would you just give him a little tender, loving care or just smile? He said the most amazing things happened. At the end of each month, the kid still needs counseling, but at the end of each month, they're always happier kids. But the most amazing thing is happening now. Each month, each staff member, including custodians, is bringing in a photo of a child we're worried about. What we've got to do is reach out and figure out who are our kids that are hurting right now. You don't know what's going on in their homes, do you? Many of the kids, you have not a clue what's happened. So maybe one thing that you can do is just say, what's your one thing? Ask each child to just tell you, here's the one thing I wish you knew that happened to me during COVID. Or maybe send an email blast to each parent or a note. Or in some of you, it's knocking on the door and saying, can you tell me one thing that I can use to connect with your child? I care about him. I don't know what's happened this year or this month or this week. Let me know. Simple things, teachers, educators. We've got to start with empathy, but it's not just teaching the child the empathy. We've got to figure out what works for our child. One other little thing that I love, Emmy Werner, Norm Bamese, when I was writing Thrivers, I discovered more and more simple, ordinary things that can make extraordinary differences on our children's lives. One other thing that I love is that many of the research says on resilient children is that the teachers know the strengths about that child. So much of the time we focus on their weaknesses. But the University of Chicago says we clearly are more energized, we're happier, we're in flow states, we're more likely to keep on going with the perseverance if we do things that energize us. Have you identified your students' strengths? Some of those kids that work hard for you not to like them and are highly successful, they're hard to figure it out. But a couple of schools are doing something brilliant as well. This is Murray Elementary in Salt Lake City, Utah. They have Pass It On packs. They said some of the kids that were really struggling, it took them all year long for the teacher to figure out what the heck is this kid's learning style? What are their strengths? We only know the stuff they're good, bad at, or what their grades or their test scores in by the time that we have the child first day at school. But what about the other things? What are the things that ignite the child, that interest them, that give the child a sense of purpose and meaning? What they've discovered when they look at those things is that it takes them quite a while. But in Murray Elementary, each child has an index card. And these days we can do digital. This is an old pack. But then at the end of the year, when these are filled out, they pass them on to next year's teacher who says, thank you very much. Now I know what's going on with this child. I start with their strengths. You can also do a Google Doc. Who are the kids you're really worried about that are struggling? Who are those children? One simple little thing you may be able to do for those particular kids is just set up a Google Doc that's private, just between your staff. And every time you find one interest about a child, write it down. One positive strength about a child, write it down. Then begin to look at your clubs that you have or your activities that you have. Are you overlooking some of those things about those kids that are struggling most? Maybe it's a chess club. Maybe it's a library group. Maybe it's a soccer club. I don't care what it is. Are you figuring those strengths out? Those are the things we need to do, because once we know that child, who they are, that's their self-confidence, you're more likely to ignite that child and be able to help them become the best they can be. Empathy is always the stretcher. Empathy in our classrooms. What can we do in our rooms? We know that across the world, particularly in more urban areas, larger areas, or more digital driven areas, those countries that are more technologically advanced, that's when empathy is falling the fastest in our children. We've social distance for a long period of children times when they don't have face-to-face interaction. What do we do for empathy? Look at the stuff that we used to do in the olden days and keep on doing it. Restorative justice, paired sharing, classroom meetings, jigsaw learning, face-to-face interaction. Maybe it's every day each child, whether it's Zoom or in person, has one learning partner when you just flip and look face-to-face at the person. Your middle school kids, your 10, 11, and 12-year-olds are already saying they're more comfortable texting than talking. The people skills are going out. But we do know something else about resilient children. They have connection. They have social connection. There's so many things in your school site, so many things that you can do to help kids to begin to connect with one another. Maybe it's nothing more than keep doing the lesson, but encourage teachers to, at the end of each lesson, or maybe every 5 minutes into that, because we're looking at attention spans going with our children as well. Turn to your learning partner. Turn in face to face. Repeat one thing you just heard. Or at the end of the day, review the one most important thing that's probably going to be on the test in June. Or at the end of the day, turn and go, what's your homework assignment? The more we start connecting with kids, Emmy Werner, Norm Gamese, Ann Maston, Michael Rudder, phenomenal pieces of work on resilience, says those kids are going to be able to endure farther and better in our classrooms. There also says work deeper learners. And when you keep doing these kinds of activities with your kids, you're going to see inclusion coming up in your classroom. You're going to be seeing caring coming up in your classroom, bullying going down. I was in a Chicago school site with a group of very adverse kids, really struggling prior to the pandemic. And I watched a teacher. Oh gosh, he was brilliant teaching history. He was mind-boggling on how good he was teaching history. But at the end of it, he always had 2 minutes of stop, and he called it hot seat. When I looked at him, like, what's hot seat? He said, it's time for it. Bell's going to ring in 2 minutes. The kids, this was around April. They'd been working on hot seat every day. They were around 11, 12, 13, which is not the easy levels for doing hot seat. But the kids immediately started putting their desks into a circle. And then what he did is say, okay, who's the kid of the day? And one kid grabbed a great big basket, pulled out a name and said, it's John. John got excited, sit in the middle of the hot seat. And for 1 minute, I'm spellbound. Because what the kids did was just wonderfully, simply, and just always sincere, say genuine compliments about the child. I realized that it took quite a while for the kids to get to that level. Many kids don't know how to say compliments to one another. Many kids don't know how to be kind with one another because they don't have caring mindsets. You act how you think yourself to be. But the most fabulously fascinating thing happened at the end of it. Johnny said, thank you very much. One more child's name was called. And you and I know the minute that child's name was called, your blood pressure, like mine, would go right up. He was the classic at-risk child. His hands were like this, head down like this, literally kind of shaking. But he took the seat. And now I actually remember praying. I said, oh my gosh, please feel for this child. Empathy 101. But they did. They saw it. They saw it, and it wasn't because they did it innately. It had been taught and primed and cultivated by a teacher. They began much slower with their compliments, much slower. But at the end of a very short amount of time, I saw something that I'll never forget. It was change in a child. I saw a child who just about 15 seconds into it opened up his hands. I saw nail marks with kind of blood because he was pulling his hands, being so stressed of what are the kids going to say about me. I saw him raise his head a little bit. I saw him start to go like this with his hands against his knees. And then at the end of the minute, he kind of just looked straight at them, stood up, and here's the moment that you'll never forget. Went over to the teacher, gave him a bear hug, and said, thank you. This class means more to me than my family. Now, I'm a basket case. I'm sitting with a group of 12-year-old girls who are a tough breed, and they're sitting there going, you know, this class really is his only hope. You should see what he has to go home to. They begin to describe the terrors of what goes on in certain ones of our children's homes. And I begin to realize that in that 1 minute, that one teacher, because if he taught kindness, he created an inclusive, caring environment, had turned the lives of his children around. He turned the life of particularly that child around. Emmy Werner would say that's exactly what happens when we do it right for kids. It's creating not just a mindset with children, not just skills, because each one of these habits is actually made up of skills that we can teach our children. But the other thing is it creates an inclusive, caring, resilient kind of environment. Kids who endure not only have people in their lives that are there, but they go to schools that have that benchmark of creating a culture of caring for them. That's what we have to keep in mind. One other little thing I think it's important for you to know is that each one of these has also skills that are teachable. So we can weave these in please know it's not one more thing to do. It's just weaving them into what we're already doing. And if you were to look at this group and say, what else do our children need? I think they need to know, and we need to know what their skill sets are. I think we really need to keep in mind that empathy is dipping with our children, particularly with a year of stress. And when stress builds, you dial your empathy down. And the outcome very often is burnout because you don't have the connection in the people. You feeling that way? Educators across the country are also feeling burnout. They need these skills as well. And so when we get to self-control, I would say that is one of the most crucial traits that every child needs. Not only is it most highly correlated to academic achievement, so there's a buy-in for teachers, it'll help the kids stay focused. It's also highly correlated to behavior management in that classroom, but it's tanking with our kids. How do you teach self-control the right way? The most brilliant idea I've ever seen anywhere is in Oakland, California, because it was a counselor, one of you, who realized these kids were really struggling. Now, these kids were from a very violent home environment. So each day, can you imagine walking to school to get into that school site in middle school? They were texting to one another which streets to avoid because you're not going to be safe walking that particular street. They were helping each other. By the time they got into that classroom, do you think they're going to be focused in on your dynamic lessons? No, because now they're trying to manage the stress, which is so hard. The focusing abilities are so low that all the rest of these character strengths are going to tank as well as their peak performance. But here's what happened. One of you walked into the classroom, realized the issues, and what you did, which I think is the mind-boggling moment, is you took a moment to teach the kids how to manage stress. It was nothing more than a 3-minute lesson on how to do deep, slow breathing. The fastest way to relax: take a deep breath from your abdomen, ride it up. Now slowly let it out. Your exhale has to be twice as long as your inhale. Does it work one time? No. But if you keep doing it a few times and you keep practicing it every day, over and over, what begins to happen is kids develop it as a habit. And now it becomes something that they're going to do without you. Or the moment they start to feel their stress build because they know now what their stress habits are, they know what their stress signs are. What happened is that the counselor did one other thing that was brilliant. And I would suggest educational leaders, you do the same. While she was teaching the lesson, she had one of her kids film the lesson. And now what she did was she left the lesson with the teacher. Because many of our teachers aren't trained in affect development. SEL skills are hard. But she does a couple of other things and she convinces the principal to do it. And here will we go. The second thing that she did was she sent a flash drive home to each kid so that each child also was responsible for teaching the parent that night. Across the world, we are seeing parental stress at an all-time high. It is spilling over to our kids. Resilient parents raise resilient children. Many of our kids are going home to really chaotic, stressful kinds of environments. But let's keep going, because the next thing she did, think about this, is that they convinced the staff to take off 1 minute of each class day. 1 minute of each class period. Now she puts it together. There's 5 extra minutes. What do? Every single day, not Mondays or once a month, every single day, the kids are working on 2.5 minutes of quiet time at the beginning of school, 2.5 minutes of quiet time at the end of school, practicing the same thing. What happened was absolutely textbook classic. Behavior problems went down, suspensions went down, attendance went up, and test scores went through the roof. Every single school in Oakland, California is now doing quiet time because that's the way to really instill habits. I mention it. You can do any other kinds of variations to this, but one of the things we're learning along the way is that a one-time lesson in it doesn't work. Each one of these is made up of skills and habits. Each one of these is something that we can instill in our children. These are coping strategies that they're going to learn to use the rest of their lives, not just now, but forever. We're dealing with a very difficult time in our children's lives, but it's going to be more and more uncertainty in their lives. They're going to need skills to be able to handle life. What I tried to do when I was writing Thrivers is identify the skills that seem to matter most. As a result, It really helped our children be able to get through life and be able to handle life in a very uncertain world. But it all starts with one thing, teacher, educator. There are dozens of skills that you're going to see in the handout. You're going to also get a core asset chart to be able to look at the kids who are struggling the most. They're all part of Thrivers. Each chapter in Thrivers is one of those particular character strengths. But last time I was in Dubai, I had many of the guest instructors say, you should fly off to Beirut. Just take a moment to go to Beirut. And I did. I thank you for it. But here's one of the things that I wanted to see, an absolutely gorgeous country. But I also wanted to see one of the refugee camps. A UN person brought me through the camp, and I was walking through it. I kept thinking of Emmy Warner. I kept thinking of those 7 strengths, and I kept saying, is there hope? Is there any hope for the kids? It's a dismal place. Bullet holes, electric wires are hanging down. I was cautioned over and over again, don't touch the wire, don't touch the wire. I kept wondering, is there any kind of a culture here, any place for a child where they can feel safe? And I kept asking, is there anything here that's a refuge? Because adversity builds, stress builds, and our children are going to need some place that's going to help them, some place in your school that's a haven, a safe haven, some place like a Mrs. Fredrickson that's going to be there for the child. Yeah, you can teach the lessons, but unless you can reach the child and make them feel safe, create a haven in your school site, adversity is going to really go up. Stress is going to go up, but I found it, folks. I found it at this camp. He said, going up, Dr. Borba, turn up to that dark alley. You'll need your flashlight on your cell phone. And while I was there, the first thing I finally caught when I went up the alley was letters, brightly painted letters on the wall. It's by the children who had painted them. They were in Arabic. I didn't understand what they were. And the UN official said, it stands for freedom and life. That's what the children say they crave more than anything else. And then she said, go ahead, walk into that room, walk into the room. And so I turned, I walked into the room, and there's where I found the hope. It was one man in that entire camp who'd created a chess club. Now, the chess club was nothing more than plastic sets. He found out how to get funding for them. Kids, when they ran in, I saw them outside the door with their face just so stressed, and they walked into the door. The stress went away. Now they had a haven, a refuge, and they had a gentleman who said, have a seat, let's play chess. I interviewed the kids and I said, what do you like about this place? And they said, you can breathe here. One child said, oh my gosh, it's the place that gives you hope. Another child said, I learned that this is a place where I can actually figure out what my strengths are. I'm really good at math. One man who realized that's the hope for children. I think that's what we all want to do, folks. I wanted to talk you through some strengths. That man was giving kids hope and optimism, that there is confidence, empathy, integrity, self-control. There's certainly curiosity and perseverance. These are the 7 most highly correlated strengths that we can weave into every day. I think we need to seriously rethink education right now. Don't stop doing what you're already doing. You're teaching to a high level. We're graduating well-educated children across the board in many cases, but we're also losing some of our kids. The struggle, the stress is way too high. So I ask you to do one little thing. Take a moment and start thinking, who are the kids that are causing you to lose a little sleep at night? You know who they are. You don't need a long just encounter group or to figure it out. You know who these kids are. Then second of all, can you do a few things? Maybe it's standing at the door every day and greeting them. Maybe it's creating a safe haven like a chess club that man did. Maybe it's reaching out to the parent. Can you tell me one thing that is going on in your home that'll help me reach your child? Or maybe it's a pass it on pack. What can we do to recognize what are the natural strengths of each of our children? These are troubling times, but there's also hope, because in any troubling, dismal time, we do know that research is on our side. The science of resilience is on our side. when we do it right, when we rethink our policies, when we rethink on how to create caring classroom environments, just like that history teacher. A minute a day, what that child, when he gave that teacher that hug, said, I want you to know this class means more than my family. It was the hope and the haven. Thank you. Next time, I hope we can meet in person. My website is michelleborba.com. If you have questions, I'm here for you. Take care of yourself, though, educators, because we need to be strong so our kids are strong.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. That was very inspiring. We've had many great comments and questions come in. Unfortunately, we've ran out of time, but perhaps we can answer one of them for a few minutes.
Sure.
I mean, there are a few really good ones. One of them says, can empathy be taught or is it inbuilt?
Yes.
Or does it come from both home and the school environment? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I know empathy can be taught because one of that entire chapter on empathy is all the research on how to cultivate it. I think our children are hardwired for empathy at birth. I wrote another book called Unselfie that was an entire book on how to teach empathy to kids. But it is in a dormant state because of the culture. When you create an inclusive environment, like that history teacher who was doing a minute a day, that creates the inclusive environment that you can teach it. We can teach perspective taking. We know that's the top employability factor. Children's literature is also highly correlated, that literary fiction, to be able to step into children's shoes. We know the teacher who was saying, turn to your partner in face-to-face connection, look at the person, or the teacher, Mrs. Fredrickson, every day meeting me at the door and always modeling it, being the example of it, are ways that you can instill in empathy. Those are the beginning states. We need to do a better job of it, but research, once again, is on our side. Thank you for that question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And perhaps another quick question. Given the pandemic, have empathetic children been more resilient than others? That's a really good question that came from Vietnam.
Thank you, Vietnam. The answer is yes. And the reason for it is Emmy Werner told us that those children who have some kind of a social network, I know you can't see them, but if they have a social network, they're more likely to be able to thrive. What I've seen is that sometimes parents are doing Zoom play dates, or grandma's getting on the phone and teaching knitting on Zoom to one another. When children in a family are feeling connected, very often that family becomes the support system. It depends upon each particular case, but we are looking at Vietnam studies that are coming out from China that are saying that kids that didn't have that empathy base are more likely to tank. The Hong Kong units, again, I'm working with Hong Kong. They're saying the same concern. Philippines are also saying the kids who had the social connection are more likely to thrive. So we need to now, when they go back into those classrooms, figure out how to make sure that they reconnect face-to-face, because our introverts are struggling. They're more anxious and concerned and worrisome about, I haven't been with my friends. How do I practice social skills, or how do I practice empathy?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe one last question, really quickly. So we've had one about early years in particular. So what are the foundations for resilience in schools as a school leader or an early years professional? How can you create a framework for implementation in places of learning, or can this be adapted to meet curriculum and or assessment requirements?
Yes, yes, yes. My goal as a teacher would be to figure out which of these matter. On my website, the first thing is there's a free 17-page educator discussion guide on how to weave this into your classrooms. But educational leader, it always starts with a strong why. Why should we bother to use these? So the first thing I'd say is start looking at the research that's coming out, and it's all on our side. Fribers has dozens of bits of over 450 scientific facts that say this is teachable. Second of all, have teachers start discussing which of these traits are going down and how does it impact academic learning and behavior. Now they have a strong why factor in it. The third thing is, for heaven's sakes, we need to do something simple, and that is start hiring people that already have the people skills. Because I really am convinced that it's a lot easier to train teachers on how to teach good content. but they got to have the connection piece, like Mrs. Fredrickson and all the like the chess club teacher. They got to have that and the connection with the kids. And then what you do is you start looking at best teaching practices. For instance, each one of these has dozens of best teaching practices. The best thing I ever saw was a principal who each year took on one best practice for the entire year. What she then did is not this every 50,000 different things that we can teach, but instead, maybe it's restorative justice. All year long, she kept working on restorative justice until the teachers became more and more comfortable and confident, and they finally were able to implement it at a high level in the classroom. Look at best teaching practices that weave this in. Cooperative learning, paired sharing. Look at one and start weaving it in. That's how we raise resilient kids and create a resilient environment for learning.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. For any questions that we couldn't get to, we'll be saving them down in the system and we'll pass them on. Or feel free to connect with Dr. Borba directly on the virtual event platform. For the audience, you'll be redirected to a short survey as well right after we end this session. So please tell us what you thought. We're on social media as well during the summit. So if you want to connect to us there, follow us on Twitter @GuestEducation and use the hashtag #GuestGlobal. A massive thank you once again, Dr. Michelle Borba. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't miss our final session for the day that'll focus on the role of women in STEM, and we'll begin shortly in around 5 minutes or so. Thank you so much. Take care and bye-bye for now.
Thank you.